Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Today we're going to explore universal patterns in nature. With me is Jude Currivan, a cosmologist and archaeologist. She is the author of The Cosmic Hologram and co-author with Irvin Laszlo of Cosmos. She is also author of The Eighth Chakra and if I recall correctly, the 13th Step. Is that right? The 13th Step. And several other books as well. Jude, what a pleasure to be with you again.
Thank you, Jeff. As always, it's a real delight to be.
In your book, The Cosmic Hologram, you notice that there are certain mathematical patterns, Fibonacci series, the golden
mean, and many others.
Yeah, the gold that was discovered by the ancient Greeks. Patterns that are sometimes thought of as esoteric mathematics, mystical principles in mathematics itself, going back probably to the Pythagoreans, that can be found throughout nature. And this suggests an underlying, the Platonists would call it underlying forms.
Indeed. Indeed, the Neoplatonists certainly would do that too.
Yeah.
I agree. I mean, what we're finding, of course, thanks to computers and the ability to analyze vast amounts of information, of data and information, is these patterns, as you say, underlie all we call physical reality, and certainly the complexity of physical reality.
Now, some theorists consider higher dimensions of space, more than the three dimensions we experience through our senses.
Sure.
Where do you stand on that?
Well, you know, we've known the whole of the 20th century physics relies on non-physical dimensions to actually exist at all. I mean, quantum mechanics requires a non-physical dimension called the complex plane, and many other laws of physics do also. And what we're realizing is that the complex plane isn't just a mathematical nicety, it's a requirement, it is a reality of itself from which the appearance of physical reality emerges. And more that's being understood that our universe is an emergent phenomenon of this deeper non-physicalized nature of existence.
Now, these complex planes are sometimes, I think, thought of as imaginary.
It was called the imaginary, you know, which is called the square root of -1 is I for imaginary. In a way, they're imaginal.
Yeah, imaginal.
They're
in other
imaginal.
words, one might say they actually represent a level of consciousness itself.
Oh, indeed. And I mean, more and more we're understanding that we can't sort of separate consciousness. You know, this question of how does mind, immaterial mind, arise from the material brain is being understood more and more as being the wrong question. That instead of mind arising from matter, that mind is matter, matter is mind, and consciousness is all that exists.
In other words, we have to rethink what we mean by matter.
Absolutely. And I mean, we only sort of see matter as being real, is that, you know, because it seems solid, and yet when we drill down to subatomic entities, we realize, and have done for many years, that they're 99.999999999% no-thingness. And what's left aren't tiny little billiard balls, they're excitations within consciousness. And we're also realizing that information, you know, not raw data, not random data, but patterned, meaningful information literally informs what we call reality.
And you find that these patterns run from into sociological situations, not just biological or natural or cosmological. The human behavior itself is patterned. this way.
In a collective way, very much so. I mean, what you're referring to are the sort of, well, let's perhaps just take a step sideways.
Yeah.
In that complex plane that you spoke of, this non-physical realm, there are what's called attractors. And the attractors are sort of boundaries of information. And those boundaries of information, whilst themselves appearing very similar, from that apparent simplicity emerges amazing diversity and abundance of phenomena. And as you say, the same patternings that we see, for example, in ecosystems, we see within the internet. The way the internet relates through its nodes of websites and pages and its processes of information, exactly the same as a biological ecosystem.
It's as if when I set up a website, as we have, and other people link, and I hope they do, to the New Thinking Aloud site, it's almost the equivalent of a neuron forming a new axon, forming a new synapse.
Yes, and it is self-emergent in the sense that when you set up a website, you can link it consciously to other websites, but you have no knowledge, no control often of how other websites may link to you. And that's exactly the same as an ecosystem. An ecosystem exists and evolves as an entity. You know, we can't think, and we know this biologically, and I write about it in the Cosmic Hologram, we can't think of, say, a biological entity, a bird, right, as separate from its surrounding milieu. Right. It's an ongoing informational dialogue. Ecosystems are co-evolutionary partners. The entirety of Gaia is a co-evolutionary partner with all the beings that are her children. And it's the same with an internet. It develops, it grows, it evolves in exactly the same way without anybody, any one person saying, oh, let's do that or let's do that. It emerges, it evolves as an entire info system.
One might say that in our lifetime, the internet is giving birth to what I would think of as a planetary brain.
Indeed, and in fact, when we go back 100 years, just after the Second World War, there were 3 philosophers, including Teilhard de Chardin, who coined the term noosphere. And it seems to me that we've moved from a planetary geosphere, we were talking geology earlier, through to a biosphere. We're actually almost in a transition at the moment through a technosphere into that noosphere.
In other words, planetary consciousness.
Planetary consciousness, yes.
And surely, this is something quite unique. And for the first time in my lifetime and in your lifetime, humans have the capacity to see what our planet looks like from a vast distance, from the edge of the solar system.
Well, absolutely, and even beyond that, because by seeing there's absolutely amazing, as you know, photographs of our tiny little Earth.
Tiny blue dot.
Oh, amazing. But also I think that the technosphere, as it were, and the internet, and the connectivity and our technologies, our virtual realities and our holograms, what I'm really feeling is they're the kids' toys as we potentially go through this next stage of our evolution as a conscious rather than a biological evolution, to literally expand our awareness, to realize that our entire universe exists and evolves as a conscious being, and we are microcosmic co-creators of its reality.
And I know that your thinking is in alignment with that of my old friend Barbara Marx Hubbard, who talks about conscious evolution, that we can now observe these patterns and work with them to consciously guide our evolution.
Very much so, because what these are showing and what I'm talking about is ultimately is that all we call reality is ultimately unified and diverse and diversely informed and manifested. So when I talk about unified reality and unity awareness of that, I'm not talking about homogeneity. I'm talking about the empowerment of the unique me-ness within the collective we-ness within the whole world view of unified reality.
Now, one example that you write about would be crime statistics.
Indeed, and any statistics, any collective behaviours are revealing the same patternings that we find throughout the so-called natural world.
Such as earthquakes.
Well, indeed. I mean, one of the things that we understand now about earthquakes is there is no such thing as a typical earthquake. So if we actually look at thousands of earthquakes, what we can do is we can graph them.
Yep.
And on a very simple graph, we can show the power of earthquakes, and it's logarithmic in terms of the power of earthquakes against the frequency of earthquakes.
Yes.
And if we graph thousands of earthquakes, we find instead of an average, all of them cluster along a straight line called a power law, which shows that the only thing we can really say about earthquakes is that an earthquake of twice the destructive power in logarithmic terms, which is the Richter scale, Gutenberg Richter scale, is approximately 4 times less likely to happen, less frequently, okay? That's what we can say about earthquakes. But what we can also say is that those earthquake patterns are reflected in human conflicts. That when we look at human conflicts, however amazing that sounds, at the end of the Second World War, Lewis Richardson again looked at hundreds of human conflicts, put them on a graph, destructive scale in terms of number of deaths, frequency, same power law. In other words, a human conflict of twice the destructive power, approximately, it's a slightly different slope, 4 times less likely to happen. And that work's been updated by Neil Johnson and his team at the University of Miami to show exactly the same patterning for insurgencies in Iraq and Afghanistan. So just think about that for a moment.
Well, I think about it in 2 ways. One suggests that maybe these kinds of conflicts, for all the pain they cause, are inevitable. They're going to always occur. And yet, another thought I have is a little more hopeful. Can we use this information somehow?
Yes, because the attractors that actually give rise to human conflicts, the attractors that give rise in a natural way to earthquakes, but those attractors that give rise to human conflicts are basically an informational patterning of our consciousness, of our collective consciousness. And our collective consciousness for a long time has primarily experienced the appearance of reality as being separate, as being duality based. It's not just that mind somehow is separate from matter, but what that does is it also suggests the appearance of separation. And what we're now realizing is that reality is ultimately unified. So reality is real, but separation is a myth. And it's that myth of separation where I'm different from you, I'm different from you. If we're family, we'll hold together, we're not so different. But if it's another country, or if it's someone with a different ethnicity, that we can think that separation gives rise to fear. So we play those fear-based perspectives out in our fear-based behaviours, which are conflicts. We can co-create an attractor instead of fear, an attractor of love. We can co-create attractors of peace.
Well, doesn't the same mathematical principle hold in the cosmos as a whole, like the collision of galaxies?
Of course. And, you know, the way that consciousness co-creates the reality of our universe is through an appearance of separation, because I learn about myself through you. I learn about myself through my relationship with the earth and with others and the cosmos. So the appearance of separation is integral to reality, but it's the myth of separation because ultimately everything is fundamentally interconnected. Everything is fundamentally part of our universe that exists and evolves as a unified entity.
Well, let me throw a tough question at you. War.
Yes.
War occurs because one group of people decide that it's in their best interest to kill
Yes.
other human beings. They're willing to kill other human
Yes.
beings, and they become enemies
Yes.
because they're willing to kill each other, or because they perceive that the enemy wants to kill them.
Sure.
How do you overcome that level of disconnection?
I think two things. I've working with a lot of folks who, for example, are working with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals.
Mm-hmm.
And one of those 17 goals is how do we bring about peace across the world.
Yeah.
But all the other 16 Sustainable Development Goals, whether it's the education of women and girls, whether it's getting greater equality in the world, for me, what those Sustainable Development Goals are all about, or SDGs are about, they're in responses to our dysfunctional behaviours,
Yeah.
such as you're describing.
Mm-hmm.
But as a healer, as well as a cosmologist, I know that those dysfunctional behaviours, rather like the symptoms of a dis-ease, come from our collective dis-ease.
Yeah.
And our collective dis-ease for me is our perspective, our fragmented perspectives of the nature of reality. If we believe the world is separate, then we believe at some level the world's a dangerous place and that other folks are dangerous. So kill or be killed.
Yeah.
Dog eat dog. If we actually can heal those fragmented perspectives into a whole worldview that understands that actually reality is unified and we're not separate, instead of separation and fear, perhaps we can understand that with all our diversity, we can empower the uniqueness of the me, celebrate the diversity of the we, realize the abundance of our beloved Mother Earth, and perhaps find ways to peace. But I do appreciate that the appearance of separation, of duality, has caused major traumas within our collective psyche. So as Ken Wilber says, we need to wake up, grow up, show up, and mop up. We can't just go, oh, reality's unified, how wonderful. We also have to realize that there's emotional trauma that still has played out in these residual ways of dysfunction. And we have to find ways of healing that.
Well, one of the patterns that seems to exist throughout the world's religions is a justification for war. You have the idea of the noble war, and that war is where men achieve glory. Glory being almost a religious term like beatification.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Even the Bhagavad Gita, from the culture that brought us nonviolence, seems to suggest it's okay to kill your relatives if that's your duty, and don't worry about it. God will take care of everything. Only God is responsible for life and death. So it's sort of like, shoot first and ask questions later. God will take care of everything. It seems to me that that's a pattern that's deeply embedded throughout many cultures.
It is a deep pattern. It is a very deep pattern. And, the idea of God will take care of it, there's still that duality, there's still that separation of somehow God's out there and we're here. And a lot of, many spiritual traditions, the mystics of those traditions, have actually explored the nature of consciousness and the nature of reality at a very profound level. And at that profound level, most, if not all of them, have realized that the nature of God is everything. God is, like Einstein said, cosmic mind, infinite, eternal, of which our universe is a finite thought form. Within that, and we are microcosmic co-creators. And it seems to me that we're at a point in our evolutionary journey where science is also discovering this ultimate unified understanding of reality where God isn't there. He, she, it, not to genderize God, but really understand that God is the infinity of cosmic mind. The universe is a macrocosmic expression of cosmic mind in its finiteness. We are microcosmic. And that all the religions ultimately reveal themselves as many different paths up the same mountain.
Yeah. Now, I know you draw to some extent upon the work of Stanislav Grof, and he's written a book called The Cosmic Mind, which expresses some of these principles, but he also writes in The Cosmic Mind that things that cause humans to normally laugh or cry, especially cry, look different from the perspective of the cosmic mind. Things that might seem terribly tragic to us are just part of the natural functionings of the cosmos.
To some degree, in the sense that if we move beyond the sort of the space-time perspective of separateness, because we've convinced ourselves of separateness, it isn't the reality. But
it's as if a young teenager needs to experience separateness in order to develop their sense of self.
I agree. I have no issue with any of that. But there comes a point where the separateness is so extreme that it's brought us to a point where we can not just destroy ourselves as a species, but also destroy our planetary home and all the other species and sentient entities that are part of the consciousness of Gaia. So we can do that, and yes, the cosmic mind will go, another planet gone. I don't want to be part of an awareness that takes that path. I'll be part of an awareness that understands and realizes the unified nature of reality, that comes to understand and experience and embody unity awareness, because for me, unity awareness isn't a sort of a grey gloop where everything's homogeneous. It actually is the most incredible expression of the uniqueness of each microcosmic co-creator within the we-ness, the diversity, the celebration of ourselves as a human species, within a larger sort of holographic scale of our entire planetary home within the cosmos. Because it seems to me that we are teenagers. I'd even say, I know we are in that sense, but I would say even earlier than that. I feel we're at the school gates.
As a species.
As a species. We're like 4-year-olds. We're at the school gates. You know, what will we learn? What will we expand? What will we go on to if we are able to understand and experience and embody unity, awareness, and express its wonderful diversity, instead of through war, through peace, through art, through joy, through love, through growing up enough to become a spacefaring species that then reaches out to other spacefaring species throughout our galaxy.
One of the universal patterns that you've written about is the way in which cities evolve, comparable to the evolution of galaxies.
Yes. Two Harvard astrophysicists, Loeb and Lin, a couple of years ago, looked at population densities of cities and galaxies. Population densities, people in cities, population densities, stars in galaxies, and showed that cities grow in these same fractal patternings that galaxies form. And we're finding that at all scales. A physicist called Ali Yazdani understood that when at phase transitions at the atomic scale create fractal patterns of electrons, those same fractal patterns play out in clusters of galaxies. Margot Strimgeour and her team discovered the same patterning of the webs that tie galaxies together.
Now, for our viewers who may not know, I know fractals has been a buzzword now for a long time, but can you define that term?
You mentioned earlier about geometric forms. Of course, the ancient geometers understood idealized forms like triangles, okay? And you can scale up triangles and scale them down. And a certain shape of a triangle, this is an equilateral triangle, where its sides are 3 sides are the same and its internal angles are the same. Whether that triangle is that size or that size, its relationships are exactly the same, but they're idealized, okay? When computers came along, a wonderful researcher called Benoit Mandelbrot started to analyze vast amounts of data and realized that when you do that, what is underlying complex systems are geometries, but instead of idealized geometries, they're fragmented dimensional geometries, which is a big, long thing. He turned them fractals.
Yeah.
So we find these beautiful patterns, these geometrical relationships of fractals, scaling up and scaling down through many, many different systems.
Patterns, nested within patterns.
Nested within nested.
Yeah.
And essentially holographic.
Which is how we would say that even a tiny little human being can be a reflection of the entire cosmos.
Essentially, yes. I mean, it's a little bit more complex than that, but essentially, yes. And we also find that just the way our behavior patterns and our emotional patterns play out. You know, we play out the patterns of our individual lifetimes, but don't we often find them playing out in our families? Don't we find them often playing out in our nations or our ethnic groups? Don't we find them playing out throughout the whole of our human family? So consciousness, in that sense, expresses itself in these patternings because everything is
And you,
consciousness.
as an archaeologist, are a student of the great mythological traditions of antiquity.
Indeed.
One might say that those are patterns as well that unify the individual to the life of the culture.
Absolutely. I mean, Joe Campbell wrote about the hero with 1,000 faces, or the mythic perceptions, the mythic stories play out the hero's journey. You know, it's a journey of awareness. It's a journey from, I talk about it being a journey from loneliness to aloneness to all oneness.
From loneliness
To
aloneness to
all oneness.
To all oneness. That's lovely. Well, Jude Currivan, once again, this has been a multifaceted, thrilling, holographic discussion, and I hope enlightening as well. I hope in some small way we can actually contribute to less violence in the world.
I hope so. And, you know, what I'm writing about in the Cosmic Hologram and the whole world view it brings forward is a way, you know, it's a direction of travel for science across many, many different fields, but it is reconciling with universal spiritual experiences to reveal the unified nature of reality. And I hope that helps to bring us together, because we've been apart for a very long time, for too long.
Yeah, thank you so much for being with me.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff.
And thank you as well for being with us.